A massive shout out to the Jonin tier member Mr. Leroy 1998 and Jenin tier Leah Rov. Your support means a lot. If you would like your name mentioned in every video, as well as receive special perks and soon having early access to new series, consider becoming a member of this channel by hitting that join button. There's a rumor going around, if you like this video and subscribe you will be trained by Sephiroth. If you become a member he will pass on all his abilities to you. Hi guys, this is the next part of What If Natsu Was the Son of Acnologia? I hope you enjoy. Altair sighed theatrically. Well, that lady sure knows how to be melodramatic. Annie glanced at her mother, delicate eyebrow raised in question. Look who's talking. Altair blinked before crossing her arms over her chest, tipping her chin up faking hurt. My own daughter. Arthur only palmed his face. Seriously, you're a lot like Natsu in some prospects despite not being his son by blood, Lily noticed. Arthur shrugged. I've heard that already. While I always enjoy a nice chat, Gajiel started dryly, I would like to find a way out before the last day finishes. Agreed. Carla nodded her head delicately. Altair looked back towards the ceiling, barely visible despite the light her orb dutifully provided. I could probably make the ceiling crumble and then have the Exceeds carry us up one by one, but that will drive too much attention on yous. We want to avoid that, Gajiel agreed. Oh, so now you want to be quiet, Arthur only smirked at Gajiel's glare. Stuff it, kid. I'm not that much younger than you, Arthur reminded the teen next to him. There's a hole in that wall. Happy made his presence known as he flew back towards the group. Altair turned to the blue Exceed, patting him on the head much to his delight. Good job, Happy, Altair grinned, moving her raised hand towards the hole Happy found, the orb floating above following her movement. Her eyes fell on a hole barely large enough for Annie to pass through. Don't you think it's a tad bit too small for us? Yukino asked the Exceed. Happy shrugged. Hey, I found the hole. What did you do? Yukino blushed in response before she looked away guiltily. She was the reason they were here, whatever others denied it or not. Altair shot Happy a glance. Be nice, Happy, she scolded lightly before she turned her raised hand away from the orb, which remained floating but its light dimmed. Her hand stopped outstretched towards the hole, the rocks around it crumbling and turning to dust, and in only a few seconds an archway was opened. Nice, Arthur acknowledged before he melted down in the shadows as the group started making their way towards the newly made passage. Show off, Annie remarked, jumping away as one shadow raised from the ground, ready to topple her over. Altair smiled, her eyes lingering on two teenagers she loved like they were her own. It was surprising how much of Myra's, Natsu's and her own personality seeped into theirs despite the age of the two when they joined. Well, Altair smirked, turning to look back at the path before her, concentrating on the orb slightly more to give the group more light. The changes have gone both ways, Altair thought of Natsu and Mira, probably already knocking mages down in the tournament. Yukino gasped moments before Altair herself saw it. With more light and already past the archway, it was not hard to see a figure lying on the cold rocky ground after all. Minerva found herself quite unhappy with her situation. Facing against Souleater, or whatever this diabolical creature before her was not in her carefully set plans. Not this soon into the game anyway. She was somewhat hoping the pink-haired menace would go after Jura and the two would have a double knockout or something. I've been looking for you, Mira informed the Sabretooth member, still wearing Natsu's face twisted in her own hellhound takeover. Minerva's lips pulled back in disdain. Well, isn't that nice of you, she replied with a sniff. Mira chuckled. Care for a dance? Minerva frowned at the question. He's acting weird. Mira didn't wait for Minerva's reply as he rushed at the girl, one hand cocked back, ready to strike. Minerva leaned to the side and twisted her upper body, moving away from her opponent in one fluid motion before she thrusted her hands forward, a glowing purple orb appearing beside Natsu, seconds before it exploded. Mira saw the glowing orb but without enough time to dodge raised one hand to shield her face. The explosion gave more smoke than fire, Mira would say, as it barely left a mark on her gray skin, pushing her back several feet. Minerva frowned at the questionable results her quick attack gave. My skin's tougher than that, Natsu informed her. You'll have to do better than that. Mira flexed her claws. Here, let me show you. Mira rushed forward once again, faking a jump before she crouched low and skidded past the Sabretooth mage who jumped to avoid the fake. Oblivion fire. Mira chanted as black fire exploded from her outstretched hand. Minerva cursed her airborne position as the fire warped around her. Myra's eyes stayed on the burning figure for a moment longer, something not feeling right. It clicked a second later and the temporarily pink-haired takeover mage turned on her heel and raised her leg in a block just as Minerva's own shin moved to kick him in the naked torso. Mira twisted, drawing her hand in slashing motion towards Minerva's own abdomen. Minerva jumped back the second she realized Mira spotted her, ignoring the dull pain in her leg that left her feeling as if she had kicked a rock and not a leg and instead more concentrated on the red liquid that seemed from 3 thin lines on her stomach where the abnormally long claws met her flesh. Natsu looked carefully at the woman before him, wondering how to proceed, his eyes momentarily moving to the burnt piece of 3 that was unlucky to be used by Minerva as a substitute while she teleported. Minerva didn't miss the momentary distraction and the short lull in the battle was blown in a fiery fashion as 2 orbs appeared around Mira who dodged the first, closely followed by second but found that the orbs kept appearing one after another in rapid succession and just as she dodged another one she practically landed on the other which blew up the next second. Mira cursed, smoke rising from her bruised back and singed hair. "You'll pay for that," Minerva panted, the amount of magic needed to keep that attack too large considering the results. Whatever form Soul Eater had it made him much more resistant to physical damage than she originally thought. Urza stood on one of the few flat roofs of Blooming Capital, her eyes searching the horizon for her adversary. She has been searching for Kagura for some time now but the woman's movements were far too erratic for Urza to properly follow and first did say she would cross this point at least once. An explosion rocked the ground and Urza's head snapped to the side, her eyes immediately landing on the rising smoke coming from few blocks away. Samira found Minerva, Urza smirked. With her concentration turned so carefully on the 2 magic signatures dancing in the distance she almost missed the one closing in on her. She would have if the sun didn't betray her position. As soon as a shadow fell on her Urza knew Kagura arrived and with a grim face she turned around, Naginata appearing in her hand that she trusted forward, her strike blocked by a scowling Kagura. "How nice of you to finally join me," Urza said with a smirk. "I've been waiting for you." Kagura snarled in response, her eyes fixed on Mira, who frowned at the unfriendly gesture. "Have I done something to offend you?" Urza asked, momentarily forgetting it seemed to Kagura that Mira asked her that. "You," Kagura said as she spun around, her still-sheeted sword clashing with Urza's Naginata in an array of sparks. "Have ruined my life." Urza froze in shock at the words, her grip on Naginata loosening and it took only another hit from Kagura to send it flying. "You and your wretched guild." Kagura screamed in anguish as she spun the blade once again, Urza jumping back to avoid it and despite it being sheeted the tip still somehow managed to cut through the skin on her right arm. Urza hissed at the pain but didn't let it bother her as she changed from her purple robe of Yuan into black wing armor, a double-bladed, 2-handed longsword in her hands which she twisted to block another strike from Kagura. "What are you talking about?" Urza felt her temper boiling. "No one insulted her guild. No one. You have taken him in. You allowed that killer inside your hall. You accepted him as a member." Kagura spun around and ducked under Urza's trusting her own blade forward but it was blocked once again by the other end of Urza's longsword. Urza's eyes narrowed. "What does Natsu has to do with anything?" "Soul Eater," Kagura screeched, her anger making her lose concentration and she found herself with a superficial stab wound. "Who's talking about Soul Eater?" "I'm talking about Jalal." Urza ducked under Kagura's blade, switching her own weapon for a sword as she moved behind the other woman, slashing at her back. Kagura cried out and stumbled forward. "What did Jalal do to you?" Urza yelled, not pausing as she swung her blade down only hitting the roof they still stood on while Kagura rolled out of the way. "He killed Simon," Kagura screamed. "He killed my brother." Urza recoiled, the memory of Simon dying in the tower so vividly flashing before her eyes she could practically feel the coldness of that place. "Simon was your brother." Kagura's eyes narrowed further. "You knew Simon." Urza's mouth clamped shut, remembering she looked and sounded like Mira. Maybe it would be easier to talk to her. Urza pulsed her magic out, alerting Kagura that something was about to happen but the mermaid did not expect for Myra's image to melt in front of her eyes and leaving Urza standing in front of her. Urza didn't need to look at her hair to know she looked like herself again. Natsu sensed the pulse and he released the illusion. "I knew Simon," Urza replied. "He was my brother too." Kagura stopped, staring wide-eyed at the scarlet-haired girl. Whatever Kagura planned to do next was stopped as Minerva landed in front of them with the grace of a meteor. Mira followed closely behind, still disguised as Natsu and still sporting the Hellhound takeover. Kagura looked at Natsu apprehensively, after seeing what Urza did, unsure who she was looking at, but the takeover soul was a good hint. Minerva groaned as she pulled herself into sitting position, a large bruise already forming on the lower part of her jaw. Sorry to crash the party, Mira grinned, the grin just a tad bit sinister. Urza gave a wry smile. Don't apologize, Arcadios, Yukino cried out as she rushed to the lying figure. What happened? Arcadios cracked his eyes open, though one stayed shut, too swollen to be fully open. He stayed silent for a moment, obviously not really seeing who was in front of him. You Yukino. His voice was hoarse. You, what are you doing here? A grimace, clearly caused by pain, flashed over his face. Never mind, he continued. Just run. Yukino's eyebrows scrunched in confusion as she looked back towards gathered fairy tale mages. Others stayed still except Gajil, who shrugged. Altair's eyes widened a second before others noticed something amiss, and the purple-haired wizard pushed at Annie with all her might, yelling at the same time to warn the others. Move. Gajil didn't need more than that as he grabbed Yukino's arm and pulled her through her away, moments before gigantic fist met his back, sending him flying through the air. Gajil, Phantar Lily yelled, transforming into his battle form and bringing his sword out, trying to get a look at his partner while at the same time keep an eye on a looming figure of their enemy. Carla and Happy flew up, both looking panicked. Before Gajil collided with the rock, shadowy hand rose from the ground and caught him, gently setting the groaning dragon slayer on the ground. Shit, Gajil moaned. Arthur rose halfway from the shadow to look at the dragon slayer worriedly. You alright? Gajil only nodded as his eyes moved to the source of his pain. Have you seen that, I hit him, Pan, the giant man yelled with a cocky grin. A man appeared behind the giant, the speed he used to make his appearance making even Altair's eyes widen. I've only seen Natsu moving that fast. Do use your magic next time, Nepa, the man, if the giant was to be believed, spoke impassively. We would have one problem less to deal with. Annie glared at the two, but her glare was quickly overridden by shock as a man landed in front of her from wherever he used to be until now. Tai, he screamed, waving with what appeared to be a flagpole, a gale generating behind him and blowing Annie back. Another shadowy hand rose from the ground and the flying fairy tale member was once again caught by Arthur, whose own eyes narrowed in annoyance. Tut, tut, the voice carried from below the ground as Rose protruded from cracked rock, growing in size until it was bigger than Gajil, its petals opening to reveal a pink-haired girl with a smile on her face. You missed, Yuosuke. Tai, the flagpole-carrying man yelled at the girl offendedly. I did not miss anything, Cosmos. She just didn't hit the wall. Tai. How many of them are there? Carla muttered when pieces of paper floated in the air, swirling next to and forming a black-haired woman. All you did was ruffle her hair, the girl told Yuosuke. Who are you? Altair demanded, stepping forward. Kama's eyes turned towards her and an eerie sense of familiarity passed over her. We are an independent unit serving the Kingdom of Fury from the shadows, Kama informed her. And also the reason why no one leaves the Pitfall Palace, Paper Lady informed them with a grin. We're what you would call perfect executioners. Kama nodded in agreement. We are the Garo Knights. A chill went down Altair's back as recognition shone in her eyes. Natsu was sprinting through the streets of blooming capital, not even bothered by buildings as he jumped from one roof to the other in order to get to his goal faster. He had felt Jura's magic few blocks away, and while he would be happy with Wizard's close proximity, Laxus and Orga's signatures were there as well, and he did not like his fellow members' odds. Natsu jumped over another gap between two roofs and skidded to a stop as he took in the sight before him. Laxus was standing slightly aside, his eyes locked on Jura, who was in the process of driving Orga's head in the stone ground. That was disturbingly easy, Jalal muttered, looking as Jura straightened his back and dusted his hands. He is certainly not nearly as strong as you, Mr. Fernandez. Jura turned to face Laxus, but his eyes moved up to the roof behind him. Laxus tensed, sensing the presence of fairy tale dragons far closer than it was last time he sensed it. Seeing that he was noticed, Natsu jumped down, using chaotic void to appear next to Laxus. Jura, Natsu greeted. Mr. Drayar. Jura nodded in greeting, smiling pleasantly. We never managed to finish our fight back in the battle part a few days ago. Jura stroked his long beard, turning to Jalal, a pleasant smile on his lips, speaking only of wish for excitement rather than any thrill for brutality the fight between them will surely bring. Mavis frowned. I didn't predict Jura and Laxus would meet before Natsu made his way to Jura. The chances of that happening were too low considering everything else. Will it change the outcome? Makarov interested. It shouldn't. Mavis spoke tersely. Igneel hummed beside them. Natsu is strong. He will defeat this saint. A curious look passed Igneel's face. Was he chosen by gods? Makarov frowned in confusion, not sure what the dragon was referring to for a brief moment before he had to fight back a chuckle. No, Jura was not chosen by gods. A title of wizard saint has nothing to do with gods. It is bestowed to strongest wizards in Fury. I am, or was, I'm not sure of my current placement, a member of the group myself. Igneel nodded. So you're strong. Makarov blinked at the question. He had little doubt that compared to the Dragon King beside him he was not exactly strong. I would like to believe so, yeses. Macau leaned forward, grin on his face. The old man's just modest. He's probably one of the strongest wizards in this arena. Igneel's golden eyes turned from Macau back to Makarov, who shifted uneasily. Really? And what does that make you? He turned to Mavis, who crossed arms over her chest, a pout forming on her face. I'm not even in my real body. You know what that makes me. That's right. How can you see the first? Romeo looked at Igneel warily. You're not a fairy tale member. Romeo turned to Makarov carefully. He isn't, right? I'm not a member of your guild, Igneel snickered. I'm simply capable of seeing spectators, ghosts, and anything invisible to humans whatsoever. Your race is very blind in most prospects. Altair, Yukino asked carefully, her eyes fixed on Garo Knights rather than on woman she was talking to. What's wrong? You are the group that Natsu talked about. It would appear that his name was not well known only on the surface but below it as well, if the sudden tension of the Knights was anything to go by. Natsu Souleater, Kama asked tentatively, though his voice was still carefully controlled. Altair simply nodded. Mr. Souleater refused our offer, Kama replied simply. Offer? Gajil asked apprehensively. He didn't like where this was going. Fairy Tales Kira refused to join us. Tai, Uosuke yelled, slamming his flagpole in the ground. The fairy tale mages tensed, the air suddenly cold. If they wanted Natsu in their group they are either really arrogant or really strong, Gajil cursed. He had a nagging suspicion it was the latter that was the case. Kama cocked his head, his eyes boring into Altair's. I assume you are done with the pleasantries. He lowered two scythes he was carrying in a position where it would be no doubt easier to swing. I know I am. Kama rushed forward, one scythe facing the ceiling while the other held back, in a position ready to cut. The black-haired woman, Kamika, from what Annie heard Cosmos speak, disintegrated to paper and in a swirling mass rushed towards her. Annie jumped back, leaving the illusion of herself standing the ground, dividing Kamika's attention just long enough to get some distance as Kamika cut through the illusion. Yukino cursed her weakness under her breath as she realized she did not have her keys. With a yelp, she jumped out of the way as a giant, Nepa, she reminded herself, slammed his fist where she stood, smoke rising from the rock, and she realized with morbid fascination that she was dealing with acid. Gajil growled in annoyance as the flagpole-waving idiot rushed at him, cackling madly. His hand transformed into an iron club and he thrusted it forward, but Uosuke dodged, waving the flag, not unlike a fishing rod, and releasing a stream of water, smoking and hot. Gajil dropped to the ground and rolled out of the way, escaping the boiling water by a mere inch. Kitties. Cosmos crowned happily, suddenly appearing before Happy and Carla, sitting happily in a new rose that protruded from the ground. Carla yelped in shock at her sudden appearance while Happy gave a shrill shriek of fright. Cosmos moved to grab Happy, her giggling stopping abruptly when the rose she was sitting in shook and fell, cut from the ground by Lily's sword. Don't you dare hurt them, Lily growled angrily, his grim face pulled back into a snarl when Cosmos landed with an OMPF in front of him. The girl glared dangerously at the Exceed and Arthur emerged from the shadows. Let me help you with this, Lily, Arthur informed the Exceed. I don't like her very much, Lily smirked and nodded his head. Altair glared at Kama, the man dancing with his scythes with deadly precision. I am trained in the art of killing since I was a child, Kama informed her. You are facing the best executioner there is. Altair grunted in effort when on-scythe came to close and she had to use her orb to stop it instead of dodging, sighing as it shattered in a spray of fragments. She waved her hand, effortlessly reforming the shattered orb. Time arc, realized. Time arc, Altair confirmed. Something in reminded Altair of Natsu, she decided, as he swung his scythe at her, once again aiming for her neck. He was either not using his full speed or he couldn't use both the scythes in that speed Altair witnessed at the same time. She was not sure whether she would be able to match his full speed, not when she was having trouble keeping up as it was. She ducked under another swing and waved her hands through the air, magic circle appearing on the ceiling and the rocks rained down on whose eyes turned up and he danced his way out, thankfully away from Altair. Altair faced the man, the orb flying towards but even as he shattered it another appeared, closely followed by another and another until he was surrounded by glowing orbs. His eyes narrowed and he dropped his brunt lower, bringing the scythes up. Altair frowned but did not stop as she sent the orbs flying towards the man, the seriousness of her situation becoming more clear by a second as one after one, orbs exploded in a spray of fragments. Her eyes narrowed and she willed the orbs to reappear around just as he destroyed the last. The man glanced at her in annoyance, obviously not happy to deal with that number of flying objects aimed his way, but it was all Altair could think of at the moment and she certainly wouldn't be considerate of his happiness. Altair found herself with a tough choice. If she destroyed his scythes, for she didn't doubt she could, he would probably use more of that speed she witnessed, but as it is now she was not capable of making more than a small bruise, if even that. The lone orb that floated above the man, shards of the rest lying beneath his feet a testimony to it. Altair frowned. To destroy or not to destroy? Choices. Frowned as well beneath the hood and face mask that covered his lower face. What are you planning? He asked almost curiously. Altair raised one elegant eyebrow. And you think I would tell you? Why? Shrugged before he rushed toward Altair once again. Altair sidestepped the strike, thrusting her leg forward, her knee driving in stomach just as elbow caught her in the face. The two rolled to the floor, Altair ending on top of the man and kicking away one of the sharp weapons. Grunted before he drove his foot in Altair's hip, the purple-haired mage rolling away with a curse. Jumped to his feet and pulled his remaining scythe up, swinging it at Altair that still lied on the ground. Altair rolled out of the way, wincing as the scythe caught few strands of her hair, leaving one lock of hair uneven. Altair scowled, her eyes on the hair now lying on the ground while she stood up. She didn't have much time for remorse as scythe-waving executioner came rushing back at her, but Altair decided enough was enough. Cutting her hair was something he shouldn't have done. Her face slightly red, both from anger and from the fight that seems to be dragging on and on, she twisted her hands in a complex pattern and just as the blade came close once again she thrusted her hand forward. Time arc. Disintegrate. Kama's eyes widened as his weapon rusted, cracked and exploded in a shower of dust, the once beautiful blade no more. His moment of distraction cost him as Altair spun around, years of sparring and training making her combat skills on par with the best. Her kick met him in the jaw, lifting him from the floor and sending him toppling back. He skidded to a stop, rolling to the side as Altair landed moments later on the spot he has occupied, her orb flying above her in circles. She thrusted her hand forward, the orb following as it crashed towards him and once again dodged, the orb hitting the stone with such power behind it that it left a circular imprint and broke once again, though it was quickly repaired by an obviously angry Altair. Jumped to his feet and ducked under Altair's next blow, sliding behind her and driving his elbow into her back before pulling a dagger out of his boot, twirling it in his hand before throwing it at the purple-haired wizard who once again turned the weapon into dust. Altair didn't have much time to smirk at Executioner because he was in front of her the next second, her movements too fast for her to properly follow as the two exchanged blows and kick, only Altair's experience and reflexes keeping her in the fight. She was not wrong about his speed and she once again found herself at loss as to what to do. She jumped back and looked carefully as reached her, her eyes on his feet instead of arms, and with a silent prayer she slammed her heeled foot in the ground. Ice make. Frozen garden. She wasn't a fan of using the ice magic considering it reminded her too much of her late mother, but she was gratified to see slowing down enough to adjust his footing at the newly slippery rock. Altair rushed at him this time, used to move across the ice even after years of ignoring that part of herself. To his credit didn't look overly surprised. Altair knew another form of magic, completely different than her obviously preferred type. Altair slammed her palm into Kama's chest, freezing part of his torso and right shoulder. The man cursed, flipped and skidded out of the ice, right beside his other scythe that until now lied forgotten. Altair stood still in the center of her little ice arena. "You know I can destroy that scythe," Altair informed him. Kama inclined his head in agreement. True, she did not expect the man to throw his weapon at her. The massive weapon spun wildly towards her, the precision with which it was thrown true to the man's claims. Altair thrusted her hand forward once again, the same incantation leaving her lips. As she watched the weapon disappear, she did not expect for Kama to emerge from the dust, his fist back before he drove it in her jaw, sending her flying through the air, reeling from the blow. Kama didn't wait for her to get back to her feet and jumped at her, fist flying as he hit her in the head, driving elbow in her nose moments later. Altair gasped as it broke, blood spraying the rocky ground. The pain from the blows was numbing, and even as Kama himself was having a problem drawing breath in his lungs, he did not stop. "Mom!" Altair's eyes snapped open, moving to look at Arthur, who was desperately trying to reach her, but his hands full between fighting Cosmos and protecting Exceeds. Altair looked at Kama, who cocked back his fist, probably ready to knock her out. Altair sneered, showing her bloodied teeth to Kama, and with a final scream Altair pulled back, the orb lying on the rocks lifting and flying towards Kama, hitting the man in the head and sending him to the ground. Altair reeled back and threw herself on Kama, ice spike appearing in her hands, aiming towards Kama's heart. Kama's eyes widened and the man reached for the second dagger he hid in the other boot. Natsu tensed as odd feeling rose the hair on his hands. He wouldn't put it down to excitement, because even against Jura he did not doubt in his victory. No, it was not excitement, it was almost fear, the voice supplied gleefully. Natsu's eyes narrowed. "I don't get afraid. And I'm not in your head, Jalal." Laxus turned to Jalal, who tensed, something not missed by Jura, who looked at the interaction curiously. The tone of the voice was the same, but the voice itself sounded off. Jura frowned. Could it be? "Find Sting and Rouge and deal with them. I will finish Fizzes," Laxus commanded, and Jalal frowned, Jura's own frown deepening. "Hey, I wanna fight Jura from day one. You won't take this chance from me." "From day one?" Jura asked curiously, smart eyes glinting, and when Laxus gave Jalal the glare Jura knew. "Mr. Souleater and Mr. Drayar, I assume." Natsu didn't reply as he dropped the illusion surrounding them. Laxus only grinned in response, rubbing the back of his head. "I am seriously considering knocking you out myself simply because you annoy me," Natsu decided, speaking to Laxus, who blanched, reasoning Natsu wouldn't do that, but somehow being more than sure he would. Jura gave a wry smile. "I would not mind fighting both of you. You know I'm a wizard saint and you should not underestimate me." Natsu looked at the wizards for a moment, an idea Mavis probably wouldn't approve of forming in his head. "You are the one underestimating yous." Laxus couldn't hide the smirk that formed on his face. "Us," Laxus thought smugly, "I will take that as a compliment." Natsu glanced at Laxus, and the Dragon Slayer had to look twice to be sure that yes, there was a smirk on the usually stoic face. "Laxus, would you mind showing this fine gentleman the power of fairy tale dragon slayers? He seems to be unaware just how little he thinks of yous." "I didn't mean to offend," Jura defended himself. "I just merely pointed out that I am not to be underestimated." "And yet you do that to yous." Natsu turned a bored look at Jura. "Were you not there when I fought 2 dragon slayers of Sabretooth?" "I was there," Jura admitted easily, knowing the dragon had a point. Natsu dropped through the ground as chaotic void opened beneath him, and Laxus suddenly found himself wondering when did he stop needing incantation to do so. Natsu reappeared on the roof he stood on moments ago and sat down, legs crossed. Laxus knew what that meant. He will be watching the fight, but he will not interfere even if he was about to lose. No, he will stand up only when the fight is over or someone else joins. And Laxus appreciated that. "Let's dance." Laxus grinned, lightning exploding around him. Jura eyed the dragon on the roof one last time before nodding somewhat jerkily, not sure what to make of the situation. Laxus rushed at him, true to the rumors and what Jura witnessed before, far faster than his bulk would suggest. Jura sidestepped the lightning that was Laxus and slammed his foot on the ground, spikes of rock rising and following the evading electricity. "Stone forest," Jura announced, and the ground shook, the rocky pillars rising for several more moments, but Jura cancels his attack when Laxus turns around and from his running and moves behind Jura, who with a quick motion of his hands rose a rock wall, Laxus stopping in front of it, almost colliding. With a grin still on his face, he pulled back his fist and shouted, "Lightning Dragon's breakdown fist." The rock shattered beneath the pressure, but Juro was no longer directly behind it, having retreated to safer distance moments earlier, his own attack at ready. Iron Rock Fist. The giant fist made of stone rushed at Laxus, who twisted his upper body, barely avoiding the attack as he did so. Letting himself fall to the ground when the fist twisted midair, its intent obvious, he rolled out of the way one more time, and with one arm propelled himself to his feet and jumped in the air, landing on the fist much to Jura's surprise. And before the wizard saint had much time to dwell on current situation, Laxus drove his fist into the rock, shattering it. Impressive. Jura complimented even as he closed the distance between himself and Laxus, and the two started exchanging blows with rapid success. Laxus ducked under the fist and twisted his arm, his elbow aimed at the side of Jura's head, only for it to be caught by Jura, who pushed the elbow away, making Laxus lose his balance and drove a knee in his side. Laxus grunted as he stumbled back, one hand on his bruised stomach, one up and catching Jura's fist. Jura's eyes narrowed, but he lifted his leg, aiming at the same spot he managed to hit moments earlier. Laxus sidestepped and balled his fist, pumping electricity through it and managing to catch the saint in the jaw. What is he doing? Mavis's eyes narrowed as they watched Natsu walking away from the fight, sitting on the roof nearby. Igneel was also frowning. Something's not right. Wasn't he told to fight the saint? Igneel questioned, trying to sound just curious. Makarov looked at him for a moment before nodding. It was the plan. I'm not sure what he's thinking. Igneel's frown deepened. Is something wrong? Makarov asked the king carefully. Igneel didn't look at him, his eyes trained on the lacrima that showed Laxus and Jura proceed to fight before switching back to Natsu, and the Fire Dragon King was vaguely aware the guy with funny hair was commenting, screaming, "Really? Something again?" Natsu disobeying orders. Igneel snorted. Depends. Does he respect you? I would like to believe he does. Makarov frowned. He doesn't disobey unless he decided something's more important. Now either he deems your grandchild worthy to fight instead of him, or he's hiding something. Natsu watched as the two wizards below fought, content to just sit there and watch, dropping trough chaotic void when a stray rock or lightning flew his way. He wasn't sure how would it end if he fought the saint, but he was unwilling to admit to himself or anyone else how close he was to lose control when he turned into a dragon. And it was all its fault. You know I'm a guy, right? Yes, but I refuse to speak to you like a person. You are an it until you show me your face. You want to see my face? There was something gleeful in its voice. You know I could pull you back in. Natsu kept his face carefully blank, but his heart gave a panic jolt. You wouldn't dare. Not now. You think I care whatever you and your guild win or lose? Actually, I do. If you didn't care, you wouldn't let me out of my mind since second day. Believe me, the only thing your victory will bring is a slightly quicker way to get my endgame on track. Even if Fairy Tail loses, I will get what I want. Not until you take control of my body, it's only a matter of time. Natsu frowned, a growl leaving his parted lips. You will not do as you please in my mind. I think I'm already doing that. As distasteful as the sentence was, it was not that far from the truth. He visited his memory hall on the occasions he managed to fall asleep since the second day. The sight that greeted him was not pretty, and the constant headache that seemed to grow with each hour was not a good sign. The books, scrolls and half-torn papers littered the ground, and he had no doubt some were burned if the ash on the ground was any identification. Why so quiet? Natsu didn't respond and kept the eyes stubbornly on the fight in front of him. Altair landed on Kama, her eyes mad with fury and adrenaline, lips pulled back in a snarl. She didn't care for the dagger that Kama pulled, didn't care her own weapon was a hastily created spike of ice. She long since realized she won't leave this fight alive if Kama does. She landed on Kama, the poor lightning giving spectators no better insight on what exactly happened after that. There was a sickening crunch of what sounded like a bone. There was a wet sound of blood being spilled across the rock. And there was the silence as two bodies stayed still. The silence did not last long as Annie screamed, the sound shrill and loud. Mom, Arthur called once again, running towards the two, leaping and stumbling over the uneven rocks on the ground, forgetting to dive into the shadows, forgetting Cosmos. None of it mattered. One of them moved, Kama or Altair. Arthur wasn't sure, but as he got closer he could see the blood. And why is there so much blood? Kama was still underneath Altair, so if he moved Altair would move as well, but it had to be her. He almost cried out in relief when Altair's hand moved, and with a groan, she pushed herself up. The snap of something they heard now proved to be the ice she held, broken in two, one end buried deep into Kama's stomach. The man was gasping for breath, eyes wide in shock, his hood back on the rock, revealing short magenta hair. Kama, Cosmos asked in shock, taking a step forward, though she paid her deconcentration dearly when Phantom Lily slammed the hilt of his sword into her temple, driving her head in the rock and sending her into blissful unconsciousness. Kama coughed behind the metal mask, one hand sloppily reaching for it and taking it off with some fiddling, blood dripping from the inside. Kamika growled, moving toward Kama, but her path was stopped as Annie stepped in front of her, cold sweat running down young girl's back as she told herself her mother was fine. A cut decorated the left side of her forehead, running from the hairline and below eyebrow, a result of one of Kamika's attacks hitting. The blood bothered the girl as it kept shrouding her vision. Kamika wasn't unscratched herself, a dark bruise already forming on her jaw and shoulder. Kamika growled at Annie, angry at interruption as she swung her leg to kick her, but all she hit was air as her leg passed trough Annie once again before copies of the brown-haired girl surrounded her. "You're not getting away," the copies echoed. Gajil himself finished Uasku moments earlier than Kama fell, so he was moving towards Yukino, who didn't seem to get the upper hand. Her lack of keys too much of a handicap despite her rather impressive combat skills. Nappa was too big and too strong, and while he barely looked scratched and winded, Yukino was holding her hand, bleeding and disfigured from the acid. The relief in her eyes when Gajil clubbed the man in the head just as he was about to deal a finishing blow was obvious in her big blue orbs. Altair stood up with some help from Arthur, who almost dropped her in shock when he realized the blood he touched on her was not only Kama's. "Mom, you're bleeding," Arthur whispered, eyes fixed on the dagger buried under Altair's ribs. Altair winced as she looked down at the hilt. "Right, help me sit down." Arthur nodded, biting his lips that turned white just like the rest of his face. Altair sat with a huff next to Kama's feet, the man still staring at the ceiling that was too dark and too far to be truly seen. Altair warped her fingers around the dagger gingerly, careful not to jolt it around too much. "I can breathe, so I don't think it cut the lungs or diaphragm," Altair told Arthur, who looked ready to be sick. "Too bad," Kama rasped next to her, earning a kick from Arthur. "Shut up, you bastard." Kama grinned at him, teeth bloody. "I'm just doing my job, kid. I'm ex-executioner for—" He was stopped by a coughing fit that lasted for several moments before he rasped, "Prisoners that fell down here. If King sends someone down, then they did something that deserves no better than dying. So you don't even know what people did to get sent here?" Arthur sounded disgusted. "You just kill them." As quickly as possible, Kama gave a weak nod. Altair gave a quiet cry as she pulled the dagger out while Arthur was distracted, freezing the wound with magic as the blood started flowing down faster. "Don't be angry at him, Arthur," Altair gasped and pulled herself up. As he said, "He's just doing his job." Arthur looked bewildered. "He almost killed you." Altair shrugged. "I didn't say I like him." Kama gave a groan as he shifted, pulling the ice out and turning on his side, clutching the hole. He could make out Kamika and Nappa still fighting, albeit both seemed to be losing since black-haired guy joined the girl. "They will lose this, and he will die if he doesn't stop the bleeding. He will die regardless, probably." "Stop the fight," Kama tried to shout, though it turned more into a pathetic whine at the end. It was enough from what he could see. Kamika stopped, and so did Nappa. Kamika looked relieved while Nappa only annoyed. Altair eyed him carefully. "What are you doing?" "Letting you go," Kama replied with a weak cough. "You will win this, and I don't want my men to get hurt." Altair seemed satisfied with the answer. More than Kama could say as she bent down and froze his wound, much to Arthur's horror. "What are you doing? I hope this means you'll leave us be. We are no criminals. We merely tried to rescue our friend from the Empire. Yukino didn't break any laws, she was doing what Arcadios told her, and our guildmate got her keys stolen by your king. Or Arcadios, I'm not sure who to blame anymore." Kama didn't reply, and for a moment Altair wondered if he died. He was still breathing, so she guessed he was alive. For now. Gajil and Yukino eyed Nappa suspiciously. The man only rolled his eyes. Altair, should we fight them?" Annie looked at Altair, waiting for an answer. She herself was sitting on Kamika's shoulders, hands in positions mere inches from hitting the girl. Altair looked at Kama. "No, let's go, don't." Don't think we will not go after you once I can get to my feet, Kama informed her, though his tone was not serious. It was more teasing to some extent, though Altair guessed she wouldn't be able to tell if certain dragon didn't give her enough practice in the emotions department. You're just giving us a head start, Altair assured him. Altair turned on her heel and with a wince and a hand on the ice started walking. Carla filed to her, worried expression decorating her face. Do you want me to carry you? I could. Altair smiled at the exceed. No, I can do it. It doesn't hurt that much. The ice is numbing the pain. Yukino walked to the purple-haired mage, Gajiel at her side. Her damaged arm warped in cloth that until now held his hair back from his face. Is your arm all right? Arthur asked, seeing the bloody cloth. It's fine. Yukino sent him a strained smile. Annie gingerly left Kamiko's shoulders, the woman sending her an annoyed look which Annie ignored. We should get Arcadios, Yukino continued, but it was Lily who answered, still in his battle form. Already done that. Arcadios looked at them, leaning against Lily, one leg badly twisted. The group, bruised and battered, turned away from the executioner, 3 lying and remaining 2 walking toward Kama. It was weird, to just walk away from the fight like that, where your enemy is still up, still watching you walk away. Strange, indeed. The feeling of that reminded even after the group left their horizon, silent. Almost as if worried a word too loudly said would restart the fight. Worried but not afraid, they could win. They would win had the fight continued. I know a way out, informed them Arcadios when the group of 9 rounded another corner, the chances of Garo Knights hearing them non-existent. At least believe I do. Altair raised an eyebrow before nodding. That's good, she said after a moment. She didn't trust him, not now, and she doubted the man will earn it anytime soon. You don't trust me, Arcadios observed. Can you blame me? Altair replied. Arcadios chuckled. No. Laxus rubbed his jaw, the result of Jura's fist only brushing against it, a warning to not let the man hit him. If that fight connected directly, Laxus shuddered, it would not bode well for him. He could practically feel Natsu's glare on him for letting even that connect. He didn't blame him. Jura nodded at him, a sign of respect. It would appear not many opponents withstand even that. Well, Laxus grinned. I can pack a mean punch as well. Jura moved again, hands rising and feet stomping in deadly rhythm, rocks rising from the flat ground forming a spiky path towards Laxus, whose response was a deep breath. Lightning Dragon's Roar. The rocks erupted. Jura's attack demolished behind giant roar, but the wizard didn't look surprised. He simply jumped away, intercepting Laxus' fist as the man appeared in front of him moments later. Jura raised his leg, kick aiming at Laxus' knee, but Laxus jumped and thrusted his hands forward, sending the saint sliding back. Jura's eyes narrowed as he formed a path beneath him, skiing over the rocks that rose and jumping to the roof. You are a remarkable opponent, Mr. Drayar. So are you, Laxus replied, once again using lightning to reach the man. Jura spun out of the punch and drew his elbow into Laxus' abdomen, Laxus gasping for breath at the sudden lack of oxygen in his lungs. Jura taped his foot and pillar rose, sending the lightning mage flying. Laxus spun in the air, managing to regain his composure. Giving me high ground was a bad idea. Jura seemed to realize that as well, because he was jumping from the roof and rising pillars from the ground towards him, intent set to stop him. Dragon Slayer secret art, Laxus shouted, taking great satisfaction when Jura's eyes widened. He had started falling by now, but the pillars Jura sent after he proved useful as he landed on them, jumping up from one to the other, moving closer towards the saint. The smoke rose, obscuring the 2 fighters from the view of spectators. Jura stopped the attack and stomped on the ground, the pillars bending over his head, forming a shield. Thunder Blade, Laxus screamed, the lightning coming from the clear sky overhead and mending with him, hitting the rock with earth-shattering force. Altair and group stared at the open gate that led to their freedom. Or more specifically at the cloaked figure standing there. The cloak was black and clean, decorated with purple roses at the bottom. They didn't say anything at first, content on just looking at Altair and her group in silence. A sound of metal against metal was quiet, but in the absolute silence, it was deafening. The figure, a woman, raised her hand, showing 2 different set of golden and silver keys. Sets Yukino recognized easily, and before she could voice her thoughts, one set was flying towards her, tossed by the cloaked figure. She coughed them, barely, but she knew before even looking at them that those were her keys. I believe that's yours, the woman spoke, her voice uncannily familiar. Thank you, she whispered in relief, silent tears flowing down her cheeks. You're welcome, she replied shortly. Who are you? Altair demanded. The cloaked stranger looked at Altair, her face hidden in the shadow of her hood, but as she lifted her chin her lips became visible in the light, lips twisted into a sharp smile, slightly disfigured by a deep scar that decorated the right side. Me. The woman reached for her hood. Well, essentially, you. Purple locks spilled from as the hood came down. Familiar, slightly older, face of Altair attached to the stranger. You from the future, anyway. In the land known as Ishgar, winter sneaked into every corner and snow covered the vast lands. Unhappy times of war suffocated the lands, for it was the year X339, but the lights at the end of the rough path could be seen. Dragon slayers made themselves known through no peaceful means, tearing their way through the throats of human haters. A lone dragon slayer walked through the battlefield, other soldiers already left. The sight of white snow soaked in the red blood of both humans and dragons something most wanted to get away from as quickly as possible. In all my years of living on this plane, I did not think my brothers and sisters would fall so low to fight among themselves. A dragon landed beside the white-haired dragon slayer. The dragon was old, ancient even. The dragon slayer knew that, for the dragon had told him his scales were not always gray but dark purple. Feathery wings spread beside him, long and white, save for the red blood, his own or of those he killed. The dragon slayer did not know. It turned its long snout toward the dragon slayer, old but sharp red eyes eyeing the dragon slayer. You are getting too careless, my apprentice. The white-haired dragon slayer frowned. I did not die, master. Isn't that what matters? I am not talking about your life, for I know it was not in any greater danger than of any other mortal in this battle. I am talking about the attacks that missed, those that hit your comrades. The old one was not pleased. Dragon Slayer growled. It's not my fault they got in my way. It is your fault for not being more careful. I can't always watch where my comrades are if I'm trying to stay alive. Havoc, the Dragon Slayer protested. You have to. If you don't have comrades you won't live for more than a day on the battlefield. Acnologia. Havoc thundered. Acnologia looked at the ancient dragon of chaos. It was not his fault his comrades were too weak to keep up with him. How couldn't Havoc see that? This dragon was one of the original three, he should be able to see it was not his fault. But Acnologia would be a fool if he pushed the matter. Havoc was angry and no good would come from his anger. I will try better next time, master, Acnologia spoke through gritted teeth. Havoc eyed him through narrowed eyes before nodding. That is all I ask. The two walked in silence for a long time after that, both having faster means of getting to the desired location but finding the walk good to think. It was only when the battlefield was long behind them that Acnologia spoke again. Did you know that tomorrow is Christmas? That foolish human celebration? Havoc seemed to consider the prospect of it for a moment. No, I'm afraid I have forgotten. Getting senile, Acnologia muttered under his breath, not truly surprised that Havoc heard him, and the ancient dragon slammed his tail on Dragon Slayer's head. Do you plan to celebrate it? Havoc questioned his apprentice. I'll be on another battlefield probably by tomorrow morning, Acnologia responded with a careless shrug, a grin Havoc didn't like forming on the face of his charge. Another dragon to kill. Havoc frowned. He was well aware Acnologia was not exactly sane in every sense of the word, but his bloodthirst only grew over the years and that made the old one uncomfortable at best. You should not take such satisfaction in it, Havoc admonished. He had seen more world than his apprentice could dream of and knew more than some of the gods themselves. That, unfortunately, did not mean Acnologia would actually take his advice if he didn't want it. Acnologia frowned at the ground, glaring harshly at it. Never satisfied. The two made their way to the camp soon afterward, Havoc moving to speak to Belsarion, the sage dragon and the second of the original three. Acnologia avoided the group of soldiers and dragon slayers sitting around the fire and moved towards his tent, craving for some peace and quiet. It was no sooner than he entered that a woman with scarlet hair poked her head into his tent, not even waiting to be allowed to enter before she pushed her way inside completely. Acnologia danced before he stood up and sketched a bow. Queen Irene, he greeted the woman who gave a laugh. Stand straight, General Acnologia, her tone was oddly teasing. Irene smiled as Acnologia looked at her. He smiled gently at the sight of the queen. Is there something you needed? Acnologia asked after a moment of silence, his eyes moving to the entrance of the tent instead of Queen's face. The sage dragon slayer shook her head, the apprentice of Belsarion searching Acnologia's face carefully. You are not hurt, she stated. No, I was lucky enough to only suffer few minor injuries which were quickly taken care of by Prince Himmel. Irene nodded her head. I'm glad that you're alright. Acnologia looked at the beautiful woman. Yes, I am alright, thank you for your concerns. Is there anything else you need? While not injured, I am tired. Irene pursed her lips and nodded. I came here personally to call you to join us in the capital for tomorrow. Acnologia looked at her, surprised. To join you? Irene smiled at his surprise. Yes, that is what I said, I believe. I've spoken to Belsarion and Havoc. There are enough men and dragons to replace Havoc and you for one day. And they agree that a day off would do you good. Acnologia stayed silent for a moment, silently offended. Does Havoc truly believe I am that weak? That I need rest? Why, I am flattered by the offer. I have no family to speak of to celebrate the holiday with. Irene shook her head. I am aware of that. I asked you to come with me to the capital. I wouldn't want to intrude, Acnologia replied quickly. Your husband doesn't find my company pleasant. General Williams's opinion matters little to me, Irene replied with a sniff. Acnologia remained silent. It was no secret the queen was not thrilled with the arranged marriage. And besides, I asked you to come, General, you would not be intruding. Acnologia nodded after a moment. He couldn't exactly decline the offer even if he wanted to. Irene knew it and she was using it. Acnologia looked at her with a grin. Then I accept your offer. Irene clapped her hands happily. That's great. I'll inform Belsarion and Havoc. We will leave as soon as you're ready. Acnologia blinked while the woman hurried away. So much about my rest. The capital was almost 10 hours of flying away from the camp, but the two old ones had more than one way of traveling long distances. The dragon who commanded space and chaos made the 10 hours trip shorter by 9 hours and 59 minutes. Chaotic Void was an old spell Havoc thought his dragon slayer a long time ago, and Belsarion was more than capable of creating his own space path through at his every whim. Sage Path even erased the negative side effects of the Chaotic Void, something Irene liked to rub in Acnologia's nose a lot while the Chaos Dragon Slayer was learning the spell. It's good to be home, Irene breathed in the air of the capital. The Wast City almost didn't seem like the country was in the war. If it wasn't for the underlying gloom that seemed to plague the city since the war started, you would believe that the war never reached the place. The Time Wizards are more commonly known as the Keepers made any damage done to the buildings in the few raids that managed to reach the capital quickly forgotten. It truly is, Belsarion agreed with a grin. Havoc looked at Belsarion as the two dragons glided lazily through the air, two dragon slayers sitting on their backs. It has certainly been a while, wouldn't you agree, Acnologia? Acnologia remained silent, only nodding his head in response. The palace in the middle of the capital was a gigantic structure, big enough for both ancient dragons to move around freely. The landing spot on the balcony, just as big as the rest of the stone palace, was quickly occupied by the two dragons, and as the queen and her general glided down to the ground, servants hurried forward, aiding them inside and opening the gates to let the dragons inside. I need to speak to Williams and let him know you'll be joining us, Irene informed Acnologia, who nodded. Of course, if you need anything, ask the servants. They will take you to our guest room where you can rest and take a shower. The fresh clothing will wait for you as well. Thank you. I don't deserve your kindness, Your Majesty. A quick glance the two shared and the queen scurried away with blushed cheeks. Acnologia stood in the guest room before the mirror, adjusting the light blue jabot collar over the black shirt. The bath was nice, he had to admit. After months of staying in the camps and only source of the shower being lakes, a warm bath was certainly a nice change. A soft knock on the doors alerted him to someone's presence, and the Dragon Slayer knew quickly who it was. He turned towards the doors as another knock echoed through the room. It's open, Acnologia replied and bowed his head as Irene entered. Instead of the black battle garment he had grown used to, the queen dressed in an elaborated dress that emphasized her figure most women envy. The queen entered the room and closed the doors. No one's here, Acnologia. Irene laughed at his antics. Acnologia looked at the queen and shrugged. I know, but it's better to be careful. Irene shook her head in amusement. I missed you. Acnologia raised an eyebrow at the woman in question, entertained by her antics. We saw each other almost every day. Irene walked closer, and in few long steps, she stood in front of him, tracing a finger over his chest, looking up at him. Acnologia stared at the brown eye for a second before the queen gripped his shirt and pulled the taller man down and into a kiss. We shouldn't be doing this, Acnologia said softly against her lips. Irene pulled herself back and looked at him. Do you want to? Of course, then shut up and kiss me. Acnologia grinned and sneaked his hand around her waist, undoing the complicated buttoning of her corset while Irene busied herself with his shirt, all the while pressing her lips against his. The clock outside rang, signaling that midnight has struck. Acnologia traced his fingers through Irene's hair, the queen resting her head against his shoulder as the two lied in the guest room bed. "Merry Christmas," Irene whispered, half asleep. "Merry Christmas." It was over. Sting was well aware of that. He was aware of that from the moment he realized he was the sole player left aside from Fairy Tail Team. Whole Fairy Tail Team. Gods, they didn't lose even one member. And here they stood, in front of him, their masks removed and their faces serious. The 5 members truly made a frightening picture. Even their varying levels of injury didn't make any of them look any weaker. Laxus looked the worst, but even the blonde lightning mage looked ready to fight a dragon as his piercing gaze locked on Sting. And Sting had little doubt he would lose if he went against the Lighting Dragon Slayer. The Sabertooth Master would lose, he knew that, for the Lighting Dragon Slayer left Wizard Saint leveled with the ground. Urza sported a twisted ankle and a deep gash on her left side, but she didn't lean against Laxus, who stood beside her. She defeated Fury-fueled Kagura single-handedly, without even using her strongest armor from what Sting gathered. Mira stood on the other end, a bruise on her cheek and cuts and scratches along her arms and legs, but she still held a takeover he did not recognize, though it was not the hellhound he caught glimpses of while running through the city. She defeated Lady Minerva so easily it seemed like the lady was nothing but a child. Jalal favored his right arm, broken thanks to Rogue and whatever that shadow was, but that seemed to be the biggest injury he had, nothing but several scratches and cuts decorating his body. The blue-haired mage titled his head up, almost dismissing Sting as a threat at all. Natsu stood in the middle. Not a single fucking scratch on him. And Sting felt himself shiver under the gaze. Sting knew he barely fought, he didn't need to. And that was what truly terrified Sting the most. The strongest member of the team barely needed. It was almost like he was there for safe measure, to assure their victory if something went wrong. But nothing went wrong. The fairy tale proved why they were number 1 guild. Maybe they weren't considered in the games like number 1s for the last several years, but general public believed in them. "You won't fight us?" Natsu questioned as he stared at the Dragon Slayer, who swallowed thickly. Sabertooth valued honor, they valued it more than anything. But he knew what would happen if he fought. He knew he would lose. In retrospect, he had known that since the day one when he saw the pink-haired dragon would participate. "No," Sting whispered, but it was loud enough. And just like that fairy tale one. Nothing surprising, some would say. Hisui Fiori would certainly agree as she turned to the knight that stood beside her. "Princess." Hisui pursed her lips in a thin line. "It is time." Acnologia sat on the roof of a nearby house, watching the small square where Sting wept on his knees, Fairy Tail Team standing in front of him. The father knew his son well enough to notice something was wrong. The dark magic suffocated this city for a long time, considering how well it already integrated. Acnologia's eyes traveled back to his son, not all that surprised to see him looking at him. Red eyes stared at blue for only a second before his son turned back to his joyful friend that already started celebrating the win. The games were over, thankfully. The Dragon King hated to admit it, but he did not find anything worth mentioning in his searching. There was simply too many people to get an appropriate sense of what was wrong with this place. But something was very wrong. Disturbingly wrong. Natsu spoke to his guildmates, but the king was too far to hear what was said. It soon became obvious that he did not need to hear what they were talking about as the group looked at him. Even Weislagia's Brad looked up, his face twisting into pure horror as his eyes landed on the king, who saw no use in sitting down anymore and stood up, letting them have a clear view of his human form. Natsu looked at his father, silently wondering if the king would be mad at him for revealing his presence, but deciding he would worry about it later. The prince dropped Trough Chaotic Void and reappeared a moment later beside his father. "I see you've finished your search," Natsu remarked. Acnologia sent him an unimpressed look, well aware his son knew of his success, or rather the lack of it. "I did," the king responded instead. "Any sign of dragons?" Natsu continued. "Aside from the 3 from Floating Island, no," Acnologia said, referring to Igneel, Natsu and himself. "We didn't have a chance to talk much since you came," Natsu pointed out and quickly continued as Acnologia nodded in agreement. "Lilith came to me a few weeks ago. I only recently learned what she was talking about," Natsu said, carefully watching as his father raised an eyebrow, obviously not thrilled he found out about it only now. I know I should have said something sooner, but I didn't want to alarm you until I was certain everything she said was true. Oh, Acnologia asked tersely, his tone cold. And what did she have to say? She warned me that someone was messing with the time, or at least is trying to, Natsu replied, remembering his discussion with Arcadios. The man was definitely not working alone, it was only a question, did the royal family know? More likely than not they did. What? Acnologia hissed, voice dangerously low. His eyes flickered to the side for a bare moment and he turned back to Natsu, grabbing his arm suddenly and pulling them through the chaotic void of his own making before Natsu could react. Acnologia landed on his feet as the chaotic void he produced opened again, the scenery much different than that of the blooming capital. Natsu stumbled forward, too surprised by the sudden passing through the void to actually get a sure grip on the land beneath his feet. His eyes were trained on Acnologia, a mixture of annoyance and disbelief flickering in red orbs for a moment before it was hidden, and the Dragon Prince took a quick glance at their surroundings. The fields that surrounded capital encircled them, flowers with their petals closed under the brilliant shine of silver coming from the full moon. Natsu did not have much time to dwell on it because Acnologia was not happy, and the king made a point to show it as he lashed out, fist a mere inch from Natsu's jaw as the prince leaned back, barely avoiding it. Acnologia spun around and caught him in the stomach with his heel, sending Natsu flying through the field. You idiot, Acnologia growled, telling me that only now? Are you brain dead? Natsu grunted as he stood up, one hand pressed against his stomach where a nasty bruise was bound to form. In my defense, I wasn't sure what Lilith told me was true until recently, and you don't exactly have communication lacrima on floating island, the Dragon Prince responded dryly. Do not respond to me in that tone, brat. You are half millennia too young for that, Acnologia sighed after a moment, pinching the bridge of his nose. And did she tell you how they are planning to do it? I assume you're familiar with Eclipse Project, Natsu said after a moment. Acnologia's breath caught in his throat and his eyes snapped to his son, icy blue burning into the red. Altair did not like the sight of her future self. It was too unexpected, something she couldn't calculate, couldn't imagine. It was too wrong and left her with too many wild factors. Is there a reason why you are here, or have you come just to see the sights? Altair asked dryly, knowing that that was not the case, but her brain was unable to and outright refused to cooperate with her at the sight of herself, older and scarred. Future Altair snorted. Do you really think I would use Eclipse just to see the sights? Eclipse? Arthur asked carefully, his position awkward. The teen was unsure if he should be on guard or relaxed around this version of his mother, and it left him half rigid, one hand twitching at the side as if preparing to cast the spell while the other gripped the inside fabric of his pants pocket. Yukino looked startled, as well as did Arcadios. Altair, Arcadios addressed the future version but couldn't quite be surprised when both looked at him. You used Eclipse Project? Altair from the future nodded carefully, head cocked to the side, almost as if wondering why they were asking something like that. I came here to warn you. She stopped suddenly, sounding like she had more to say, so much more, and looked around the cavern they still stood in, golden gates of their freedom behind her. But we cannot talk about it here. We have to find him before it starts. We have to get out of the castle and find him. Find who? Gajiel demanded. Look, Altair or whatever your name is, I'm not following you anywhere until I know what is going on. Altair looked at Gajiel, half annoyed he didn't trust what was essentially her, but also half grateful since she wanted an answer as well. Since I can see it might cause some problems, might as well call me Oracle. Altair raised a delicate eyebrow at her counterpart. Oracle, really? Oracle shrugged. It wasn't my choice or idea. Dragons tend to be unimaginative about naming their enemies. Name it as I see it, is their logic if I'm not mistaken. The silence once again threatened to suffocate them, but Annie decided to speak, worry evident in her large eyes. Who are you trying to find? I assume it has something to do with dragons becoming our enemies. Oracle looked confused for a moment. Becoming our enemies? Dragons always south out to destroy humanity. I am trying to find Son of Igneal before it is too late. Altair tensed and so did the rest. What are you talking about? Oracle looked at her counterpart with a strange mixture of surprise and sorrow in her eyes. In the future I come from, Son of Igneal will be. Never mind, will be the leader of the rebellion against dragons. The last slayer and the last capable of killing Acnologia on Zirf. He was our only hope, and he is your only hope. Your only hope to stop the apocalypse. Son of Igneel, are you talking about Natsu? Gajiel questioned carefully. Well, of course, who else would I be talking about? Oracle snorted, her lips twisting into a smirk, pulling the scar on one end. Annie and Arthur exchange a look before they look at their mother, pretending to ignore Yukino's and Arcadio's surprised gasps. How long are you in this time? Arthur asked. At least. Only a few days, haven't had time to actually find anyone more than in passing, Oracle confirmed, and Arcadios frowned. That's not right. You think she's from another universe's future? Arthur turned to Gajiel, who shrugged. She's definitely not from this. I mean, can you imagine Natsu breathing fire? Arthur scrunched his face, remembering his father's counterpart from the training trip. The happy-go-lucky idiot who expressed his emotions so fiercely and wore them like a badge of honor. Trying to picture his father like that, long hair cut short and stupid grin on his face, despite the two shared the same face, it was definitely something he could hardly picture. No, Arthur agreed at last. Oracle seemed confused by the conversation in front of her. What do you mean imagine? Altair eyed her counterpart before replaying carefully, wondering how she would react. I assume the Natsu you are talking about is Natsu Dragneel. Oracle nodded without a pause. Well, you are in the wrong universe, my dear. Here we have Natsu Souleater, son of Acnologia. Fairy Tale's dragon. Oracle's eyes widened in horror before she hissed. Shit. Her lips twisted in an ugly snarl, pulling at the scar that decorated the side of her lips. But everything else was pretty similar to what happened in my past, Oracle muttered. With that in mind, I would dare to say the same fate awaits this universe. She grimaced at the word. I was there, the day dragons came. The group looked at her quizzically. Eclipse was built and it should have been used as a cannon, but the gates were opened too late and the dragons raised the crocus in a matter of hours. How many dragons are we talking about? Arthur asked after a moment. He was sure Natsu would tell them if dragons decided to suddenly attack humans. Oracle bit the inside of her cheek for a moment as if contemplating whatever to actually tell them. 10. Only 10. 10,000. Hisui Fiore strolled through the corridors of the castle, her face twisted in worry. Sir Arcadios was still in the pit, probably dead by now, and all because of her. She couldn't mourn him. She wasn't even allowed to, because what would the kingdom think if they saw their princess crying and mourning over the death of a knight who no longer that. A knight who had fallen out of her father's grace. She had informed her father of what her friend from the future had told her. It took some convincing, but ultimately her father was a smart man and knew she would make jokes about a matter as important as this. She could hardly believe her luck when she had seen the power of dragon slayers in the tournament. Even he wasn't aware of their strength. And that gave her more hope than anything. Her father promised to talk to the guilds and get them on the front lines, to defend their kingdom. If everything went according to plan, then they wouldn't be needed, but if worst came to worst and Eclipse failed to kill all the dragons, then those dragon slayers and Fairy Tale's dragon would be of more than enough help. She was sure in that. She had to be, for if she started doubting their ability to win, all would be lost. Hope is a powerful weapon. He said as much. That was one of the reasons he returned, for the hope all but disappeared in his time. She walked out of the castle and into the yard, just in time to see the Eclipse gate rising from the ground on the platform with the help of machinery her best engineers spent months designing. Everything will be all right. Hisui let herself smile for a moment. Yes, everything would be fine, he promised. Makarov wondered how was he even still alive in his old age. Considering everything that happened in the last year, 7 if he counted those he and his children spent asleep, his heart should have stopped a long time ago. With a grim face and a heavy sigh, he truly wondered, was it too much to hope he would soon wake up and find himself back in Magnolia? The king was clear, despite the fact the whole situation reeked of something bound to go wrong. And even though all the guild worked together in hopes of stopping 10,000 dragons, he was skeptical. The lack of 3 dragons that should be right here was not helping. Acnologia and Natsu disappeared pretty much just as the games ended, and Igneel disappeared soon after them, probably going to find them. As much as he hated the Black Dragon King, he hoped they would be back soon. Acnologia might die tonight, but he would not die before killing at least a few. With a grimace, Makarov looked up, feeling disgusted with himself. What had possessed him to keep this from Natsu he truly wasn't sure, but he had a feeling he made a giant mistake. The moon was bright above their heads, making the stars less visible, but they too decorated the sky in large number. The Fairy Tale mages were gathered in the town square, making fruitless attempt to hide nervousness that suffocated the air with light conversation. Wendy shifted nervously next to him and he looked away from the sky at the girl who was hugging herself, biting her lower lip to the point she almost drew blood and surely would soon enough if she continued. Everything's going to be alright, Makarov assured her with a smile which he hoped looked more real than it felt. Wendy offered him a smile of her own though it looked more like a grimace. I hope so. Don't worry, Jalal told her, resting his arm on girl's shoulder. We have 3 dragons and 5 dragon slayers on our side along with Eclipse Cannon. Those dragons won't know what hit them. Wendy, for all the effort she put in hiding it, still looked like someone burned her when Jalal addressed her. Laxus cracked his knuckles, a grin on his scarred face. That's right, we're going to send those dragons back to whatever hole they crawled out with their tails between their legs. The square suddenly started turning darker and one by one, mages looked up, the silence falling over the square as the eclipse started. Igneel massaged his temples while Acnologia glared at his son with such intensity it was a wonder smoke wasn't rising from pink hair. Natsu looked somewhere between I don't care and I swallowed a snail. It was understandable, though. Igneel was pretty sure his own face betrayed just how much problems, if this could even be called a problem, disaster would probably be more accurate, this bit of information brought. So let me get this straight, Igneel tried again. We could be facing any number of dragons because Eclipse is here. This person actually managed to reconstruct it. Natsu shrugged slightly awkward. From what you told me it looks the same so it is possible the gates were never destroyed. Acnologia sighed, averting his eyes from his son and nodding in agreement. We need to get moving, one of us should get to the floating island and make council aware of this development, Acnologia mused before he added. Get the idiots who have lived through Ragnarok before. I hope that will be enough but we can't risk losing even that much. Even though he didn't say who should go it was quite obvious, one of yous didn't refer to him and by the way he was looking at Igneel it clearly referred to the Fire Dragon King. Is there enough time? Igneel asked carefully, looking up at the sky. I can use fire drift to get halfway there but wards around the island won't let me get closer and if I need to inform entire council. I won't get back with help for several hours at least. Acnologia grimaced, aware of that. Forget the council, wake up the 4 and get them moving here at top speed. Demur is the only one who's not capable of interdimensional travel so I'm sure one of you will be more than capable of taking him. Igneel nodded and disappeared in the swirl of flames leaving father and son alone in the field outside the walls of Crocus. Natsu stayed silent before he turned to his father. He was usually the one to tell the others what to do. With his father here he wondered if that was still the case. Probably not while he was around. The Dragon Prince didn't like what was happening. The fact there was an unknown factor in a situation like this was worrying at best. Believe me, that's not the worst thing you should worry about. Natsu didn't respond but he found himself wondering if his father could feel something amiss because as the voice spoke the High King looked at him. Don't be ridiculous, he can't hear me, sense you. Meh, I wouldn't be surprised, Acnologia is powerful. Is there something else you decided not to tell me? Acnologiated him critically. No, Natsu replied after a moment. You are such a liar. Shut up, we need to get going towards the gates, Acnologia said. Igneel went to bring reinforcement but that doesn't mean we won't do what we can in order to stop the gates from being open. Natsu nodded curtly just as the sky started darkening. Acnologia scowled fiercely. We have to hurry. There were not many clouds in the sky but the air smelt of oncoming storm and electricity. But then again it could be the building magic. While the Dragon Prince agreed completely he did not expect Acnologia to transform. The black magic swirled around his form, chaos magic exploding towards the rapidly darkening sky. It was in moments like these that Natsu could see the vast difference in experience alone. What took him more than a minute to do accompanied by a rather disgusting sound of tearing, Acnologia finished in an instant, any unpleasantries happening too fast to actually be heard or felt. The Dragon King roared and spread his wings, with few powerful beats lifting him in the air. Natsu understood what his father wanted without even a glance sent his way and the sun jumped in the air, aided by magic, and landed on Acnologia's back. He could feel the powerful muscles moving underneath him and he felt his own muscles tensing. They were in a hurry but he couldn't help but feel like it didn't matter. It felt like they were already late. He just hoped his family was okay. When did I become all mushy on the inside? Natsu squeezed his eyes shut. Now was not the time for that. Acnologia towards the town. Crocus was still shining in night lights, the fireworks traditionally fired at the end of GMG only now ending. The night looked beautiful and people seemed happy, until they saw Acnologia soaring through the sky that is. But Natsu couldn't find the beauty in it. His stomach tied in a knot and it had little to do with the breakneck speed Acnologia was using. He eyed the panicked soldiers in the yard they were closing in. The lunar eclipse was not complete yet. They had several more seconds. Hisui was looking at them in a blind panic and pure horror, her mouth half opened between giving an order and a scream. Arcadios stood beside her, clad in white armor that in Natsu's opinion was ridiculous. But who was he to judge someone's fashion choice? Should I transform? Natsu asked his father, not bothering to yell knowing his father would hear him even with the screaming soldiers beneath them and wind around them. Not yet, Acnologia responded and the High King stopped beating his wings, mouth opening to fire. A dragon was the only creature that could probably use magic this close to the gates and that was the reason Natsu stayed where he was, mindful not to fall from the back as Acnologia shifted. He didn't expect the gates to open before the eclipse was finished, however. The princess stood her ground even as Arcadios tried to, as gently as possible, drag her away. No, she finally managed to tell Arcadios, who gave a pitiful whine. I will not run. Eclipse is finished and it is more than enough powerful to kill one dragon even if it is Acnologia. The ground shook and Acnologia closed his mouth with a snap, his eyes widening, locked on the gates. The ground shook and Hisui smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. See, Arcadios, even the mighty dragon will shy away from a power of fury. I will protect my people. Foolish girl, you have no idea what you have done, Acnologia growled as he landed, his landing shaking the ground and it was quickly followed by another as a shadow appeared in the light framed by the gates. Hisui stayed silent, not understanding the dragon's words. Princess. One of the knights cried desperately and it took Hisui a moment to realize their horror was no longer concentrated only on Acnologia but on something behind her. So against her better judgment, she looked behind. A paw came crashing down in front of her, giant claws and silver scales, cracking the stone before her. A dragon pulled itself through the doors, with a head too small for its massive body and wings long and sharp. Small eyes blinked at them, shining in the eerie light as the dragon parted his lips, roared and leapt in the air, spreading its wings and circling around them, eyes almost immediately locking on Acnologia as a roar ripped the air. Acnologia did not pounce on the dragon immediately, his eyes instead locked on the next dragon that came out. The dragon, shorter than him, covered in rock came out. The rocky dragon moved out, waving its tail as it went, knocking back several soldiers, a sound somewhere between a roar and a laugh leaving its lips. The rocky dragon didn't even move out of the gates completely when a dragon not even half of his size moved, climbing over him. The dragon was small and its body slim and snake-like. He lacked front legs though they were replaced by his wings that bent under an angle that allowed him to use them as legs. The dragon's dark green scales glinted as it looked around, its pointy snout sniffing the air before the dragon gave a wheezing chuckle and spread its wings but instead of flying only jumped and slithered away from the other dragon it climbed over. A flaming head moved through the doors next and Acnologia could feel himself tensing as Atlas flame roared at the sky. Natsu stared at the fire-coward dragon for a long moment, his jaw falling open. It took him a moment to realize that Hisui still stood in the same spot and with a curse he finally jumped off of Acnologia's back and dashed towards the princess that was too stupid or too frightened to move. He tackled her to the side just as a flaming foot of his first friend slammed into the ground, fire immediately scorching and blackening the centuries-old stone in seconds. As he landed, the dragon prince pulled the princess in one movement back on her feet and in his arms, jumping further as the green dragon pounced on them. Hisui cried out in terror as acid flew past them and Natsu cursed as he landed, turning on his heels and slamming his foot wrapped in magic in the stone, cracking and lifting the stone that until moments ago created a path. The stone slab rose just in time to stop another ball of acid melting them and with a jerk of his leg, Natsu sent the melting marble towards the green dragon that stumbled back as it hit her, now that Natsu got a better look, in the head. Hisui gripped his shirt, holding for her life as he jumped again, propelling himself in the air and landing next to Arcadios, putting the princess down none too gently and even as the knight yelled at him for manhandling. The princess Natsu sprinted back at the green dragon, slamming his fist in the pointed snout. Acnologia decided he has seen enough and he turned to the princess his son just dropped. Close the gates this instant, idiotic female. Can't you see what is happening? Don't talk to the princess like that, you beast, the White Knight yelled back. Acnologia narrowed his eyes at the man, and with only a few steps he towered directly over them, fangs bared a bare inches away from their faces. Close the gates or I will blow this whole town in pieces. I can't, Hisui cried. The gates cannot be closed while lunar eclipse still lasts. Acnologia glanced back at the gates, growling at the sight of the fifth dragon exiting. There must be a way. I would destroy it, but the fact I might destroy the past is not appealing to me. Now talk or I will rip you to pieces. I don't know. Hisui sobbed, and as Acnologia was about to lose his patience, sixth dragon that walked out of the doors, a purple dragon with growths on his head, decided that Acnologia was to be attacked and jumped, spreading his wings and landing on Acnologia's back, stabbing its talons deep in the flesh of the king. Acnologia howled, more in fury than in pain, and raised to his hind legs, snapping with his teeth at the dragon that held on his back. The princess screamed again as the two titans stumbled around, almost stomping on them, and it was only thanks to a timely arrival of Fairy Tale's time mage. Altair jumped forward and took the hand of the princess before spinning and sending the girl flying, only for the princess to be caught by Arthur, who looked at her, grinned before putting her down. You should think about finding a shelter, princesses. Hisui nodded dumbly, but Arthur didn't wait to see it as he sprinted away towards Gajil, who was in the middle of antagonizing a blue dragon that was exited the gates mere moments before. Natsu was not overly thrilled to see Altair appear in the middle of the battle between dragons. Unfortunately, he did not get the chance to inform her of that as he gripped the maw of the green dragon he was fighting. The dragon was small, the size earth dragons usually reached, but her physique was only similar in traces, not to mention the acid was the wrong type of attack. Despite the fact Natsu never faced a dragon capable of spitting acid, he knew what dragon type he was facing. Acid dragons are extinct in this time, all killed in the last war, he mused bitterly, avoiding another ball that melted the bush behind him and moving to land a kick on the dragon's back. The dragon growled at him as she avoided, baring her double row of teeth, all jagged and sharp. You are foolish, little hybrid, she hissed for the first time since they started their dance. Her accent seemed off. A dragon not raised on this territories, or was it because she came from a time 400 years ago? Thinking you can defeat a dragon? Natsu's eyes narrowed. I am no hybrid, I am the Dragon Prince, and as if to prove his point the Dragon Prince released a roar, sending the dragon spinning as the attack nicked at her tail, tearing a part away. The acid dragon howled in pain as its tail got cut in half. Tearing the tail of mighty Khalida. You will suffer for this. Chaos Dragon snorted. Talk about irony. Extinct species, yet her name is deathless. Khalida did not catch on the irony of her name as she sneered at the Dragon Prince. And who are you to call yourself a prince of dragons, hybrid? Natsu straightened his back. Despite her small size, she was still the size of a cottage, thus a lot taller than him. My name is Natsu Souleater, son of Acnologia. Khalida cried like she was burned, hissed and wailed. Impossible. The ground shook once again. The shook stronger than what a dragon's movement could create, and both looked towards the gates just as the moon once again started showing. The gates shook once more, and Natsu recognized Yukino and Lucy as they used the keys to close them just as another shadow appeared on the doors. The shadow did not pass as the doors closed with a mighty thud, the sound ringing through entire Crocus. How did they get here? He was not sure, but he would not question it now. He looked around and at the moonlit sky. 13 dragons circled around them. 13 dragons that were never meant to walk this plane. Not in this time. Acnologia roared as he threw the purple dragon from his back and flown in the air with quick and precise beats just as a man rose from the shadows in the middle of the yard. Man's hair was long, around the same length as his in fact, but the coloring was weird, one half black and the other white. The man smiled as the mages that by now gathered in the yard and knights tensed, weapons and hands pointed at him. He spread his arms as the silver-scaled dragon landed behind him, forcing the knights and mages to take a step back or risk being crushed or hit by the thick tail. Hello to you all, mages, knights and royalty, the man spoke, and Natsu took a step back, suddenly feeling dazed as the voice echoed through his head. I am sure you are all wondering who I am, so I will gladly introduce myself. The man looked quite a bit like a madman, but the red eyes were sharp as they surveyed the crowd. My name is Rogue Cheney. At the shocked gasps the man rolled his eyes. The future Rogue Cheney. I am here to crown myself as your new king, so be nice and kneel before me or watch as your city burns. Natsu swallowed down as bile rose in his throat, the deafening laughter of the voice making it even harder to focus. Never. One of the mages screamed and charged only for the silver dragon to bend its neck and bite the man in half. Future Rogue looked disapprovingly at the bloody mess that was left behind as the mage's legs reminded on the ground, guts spilling over the stone. Ah, and here I hoped I wouldn't have to kill you all. The future Rogue glanced behind at the dragon. Motherglare, if you would be so kind. The dragon only nodded as it rose in the air, Rogue smoothly jumping and landing on dragon's head. Natsu watched with wide eyes as the dragon obeyed the man and dawning realization came upon him. The fact the man and the voice echoed one another a moment later only confirmed what he now knew. Kill them all, kill them all. Natsu's mind spun and his senses blurred as he listened to the man he knew he had to kill. He had to kill him or he will lose himself. Maybe it was too late already. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. The next part will be out soon.